Here to take some questions.
So I got the obvious one is you were walking with leadership candidate Heather McPherson and Alberta NDP MPs. So what's up with that?
Well, I mean, clearly, I'm a huge fan of Heather's. Heather, I've had the opportunity to work alongside for many years as an MP in this House, and Heather's been a champion for human rights in this country and standing up for social, environmental, and economic justice. And she's also proven that she can win her seat in probably the most difficult election the NDP's ever faced, and survive not just any seat, because 7 of us obviously are fighters and champions in our ridings, but she won in Alberta. And so Heather's proven that she can be a winner, and I'm a huge supporter of Heather. So it's very exciting to be able to announce today that I'll be supporting Heather in the leadership to lead our party and bring us back to official party status.
Mr. Lewis, I believe, has raised the most amount of money. He's also gained the support of Ms. Gazan from your caucus. Why aren't you supporting him?
Well, you know, when I looked at the leadership candidates, and all of them bring some really important values when it comes to social and environmental and economic justice, which are really the prime values of our party. And, you know, whether it be Rob Ashen, who's been a, incredible champion for workers, or Avi Luce, who's talking about corporate greed, which is really, truly one of the biggest impacts on cost of living, or Tony McPhail, who's fighting for farmers and standing up and reminding people that climate change is having an incredible impact on our food security and our planet, or Tennille Johnson, who's an incredible Indigenous leader from Vancouver Island who understands coastal issues but understands also the critical role that health plays. So having all of those great leaders, I believe that Heather McPherson can channel all of the great leadership qualities of those other leaders and bring us back to official party status. Heather's proven that she can win. She's proven that she can. She's a leader when it comes to issues that matter to everyday Canadians. And fundraising, sure, it is important, but we saw Pierre Poilievre, who out-fundraised Mark Carney. It doesn't decide who votes. It certainly helps people have the ability to amplify their message, but I believe Heather can win. I believe Heather's proven that in Edmonton, Strathcona, in a province where she certainly was out front fundraised in her province, and she won there too. So regardless, I'm supporting Heather, and I believe she's the best representation of our party, and she can broaden the reach that we need to broaden to bring us back to official party status and win seats across the country.
So you're saying Mr. Lewis can't get you to official party status with his policies?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that, I believe Heather gives us the best chance and the best opportunity. And I'm really proud to stand with Heather. I've been a witness to the incredible work that Heather's delivered here in the House of Commons on behalf of Canadians.
I've got to ask you about electric vehicles. Mr. Carney has gone to Vaughan, Ontario to announce changes to the EV mandate to remove, I believe, the requirement of so many electric vehicles to be made, but increasing the emission standards, bringing in, the words escape me, but small amounts of money to help people buy an EV. As an NDP, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I know Don Davies is going to speak to that today, and Alexandre Boulerice, who's our critic on environmental issues. But I can say this, that, we support the rebate coming back. That's absolutely essential. The mandate, we want to see a mandate in place. We've seen it be effectful in provinces like British Columbia, which is the second highest jurisdiction in North America for new vehicles that are EVs. So, and Norway, of course, is the leader globally. And so, but it's critical that we have labor and workers and protecting those jobs with us when we make policy and ensuring that we build those vehicles here in Canada, and that is absolutely essential. So I think Don Davies and Alexandre Boulerice are expected to speak on that in just a very short period of time.
Are you favorable to the block opposition motion today?
I actually haven't had a chance to dissect the motion, so I'm not going to comment. I'm going to talk to Alexandre Boulerice, who's our Quebec lieutenant, obviously, in our party, and so I look forward to maybe something you want to ask Alexandre when he gets here. So, yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Shocker, I'm not endorsing anyone in the NDP leadership race. I wanted to comment today, Elizabeth May, leader of the Green Party of Canada, on the Prime Minister's announcement. I definitely am pleased to see the rebate back in place to encourage and assist Canadians who want to have an electric vehicle, or at least to have a vehicle with that potential, hybrid, plug-in, cars are really the combination of electricity and a hybrid, make it really possible for Canadians, even if you can't get to a high-speed charger, to have a car that's running carbon-free. It certainly is disappointing, though, to see the EV mandate dropped, and one would have to look very closely at what the Prime Minister has said in terms of using the old-fashioned and I think very valuable tools of regulation under the corporate average fuel economy standards, which are regulated through the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. He said he'll double the ambition on reducing greenhouse gases in a range of cars, including cars with internal combustion engines. So typical cars that run on gas and an internal combustion engine will have, the Prime Minister says, more efficiency required in that fleet. Will he extend that to light trucks and SUVs? That would make a huge difference in our overall greenhouse gas emissions from our personal vehicles across Canada. It might be enough, if he does that, to make up for dropping the mandate for more electric vehicles being sold in the Canadian market. Definitely also support more electric vehicles being manufactured in Canada. That said, I'll be kind and say it was a stretch for the Prime Minister to claim that Canada is a climate leader. We remain the worst performer on climate targets and greenhouse gas goals of any country in the G7. Let me just repeat this. Even the United States, after one term of Trump, and we're now in the middle of another one, has not done as badly as Canada. And that's because we have, for every time we've had a substantial reduction in greenhouse gases, such as when Ontario shut down its coal-fired power plants, those cuts were overwhelmed by growth in emissions from Alberta. We need to have a Canadian climate plan. We need to bring down our emissions, and it's not a political commitment. It's absolutely mandated by global science that says very clearly, and we experience it daily, globally, that we are in a climate crisis fueled by fossil fuels. We are in the midst of seeing large systems begin to unravel. So we're seeing changes in ocean current circulation. We're seeing changes in things like the polar vortex. We used to keep the cold Arctic air through fast-moving polar winds in the Arctic. The polar vortex collapsing has huge impacts globally. We're seeing increased and prolonged drought, increased floods, and heat levels of heat domes that are life-threatening. I could go on about the kind of climate emergencies we've seen. We know that they're in dollars and cents, breaking records year on year, costing Canadians billions of dollars and costing lives. So to the Prime Minister, if this government wants to be a climate leader, if we want to have Canada in the world as a climate leader, then we must achieve the targets of the Paris Agreement. We're nowhere near achieving them. And since Mr. Carney became Prime Minister, most of what was in place from the previous government, and it was under the Trudeau administration, inadequate to meet our targets, nowhere near where we should be. But those pieces that were beginning to work, like the consumer carbon price, bringing down emissions somewhat, have been abandoned. We have completely abandoned the home energy retrofit programs. Makes no sense. Canadians are struggling with affordability, how to bring down the cost of heating and cooling your house, while at the same time employing Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Makes tons of sense, but it's been scrapped. So has the goal of planting 2 billion trees, so have the other measures, including oil and gas cap, and now the EV mandate is scrapped, but with a replacement. So I asked the Prime Minister, where are the replacements for the other programs that your government has scrapped? Where is the plan that's credible that Canada is going to meet our targets? Because they're not about politics. They're about whether our kids have a livable world and whether we save lives in Canada and around the world by averting the worst of the climate crisis. Merci.
Madame, pourriez-vous nous dire en français et très succinctement, parce que là, ça fait 5 minutes, votre pensée politique sur l'annonce d'aujourd'hui?
Oui, l'annonce d'aujourd'hui, c'est les bonnes nouvelles, mais ce n'est pas suffisant. On doit faire plus pour atteindre les cibles de Paris. Et maintenant, je veux dire, il reste dans le budget, mais il est annulé avec l'accord avec Mme Smith, que le crédit d'impôt investissement pour le captage, l'utilisation, le stockage de carbone, ce n'est pas disponible pour la récupération assistée de pétrole, mais quand même, M. Carney a décidé que c'est les bonnes nouvelles pour Alberta, bien sûr, et pour l'entreprise pétrolière, que la récupération assistée de pétrole va gagner de plus des milliards par le gouvernement du Canada vers l'industrie de l'énergie fossile. Et où est nos investissements sur l'énergie renouvelable? Où est les investissements sur un réseau électrique renouvelable et vraiment vert? Merci.
Good afternoon. I'll be addressing the Liberal EV announcement today with 4 main points. First, today's Liberal electric vehicle announcement is yet another blow for the Canadian auto workers. For an auto worker, for example, in Brampton laid off after Stellantis Jeep Compass moved to Illinois recently, learning that up to $2.3 billion of Canadian taxpayer dollars will now subsidize the American auto industry is very cold comfort for those workers and their families. The Canadian auto manufacturing our auto manufacturing sector makes more than 1 million vehicles annually, yet very few meet the requirements announced today, less than 5%, in fact, if you include, for example, Windsor's Stellantis plant producing the plug-in Pacifica minivan and EV Dodge Charger. Again, less than 5% of Canadian-made vehicles will benefit from this announcement, despite it being 2.3 billion Canadian taxpayer dollars. So as a result, American and other foreign-made EVs and plug-in hybrids will capture the benefits of this new subsidy. Despite the Liberals signing on, and I'll remind you of this, up to $52 billion to subsidize and create an EV supply chain in Canada, the vast majority of these vehicles produced again and sold domestically remain gas-powered in Canada. Today's policy will therefore benefit countries like the United States that manufacture far more EVs than Canadians drive. In fact, the rebate will now support American EV producers that relocated from Canada to the United States due to the U.S. tariffs, like the Jeep Compass, as I mentioned. Canadian taxpayers should not be forced to subsidize American-built vehicles that should have been produced in Canada, is really the bottom line today. Secondly, rather than scrapping the damaging EV mandate, the Liberals have effectively reintroduced it under a different framework. The new standards will pressure the Canadian manufacturers to produce 75% EVs by 2035, which is only a modest change from the previous 100% requirement under the original EV mandate. Conservatives have long warned that forcing 100% EV sales by 2035, while EVs still represent a minority of our market, was unrealistic and created prolonged uncertainty for manufacturers and workers making long-term investment decisions. For example, in Q3 of 2025, fewer than 10% of newly registered vehicles in Canada were zero emission. Delays in abandoning this original Liberal EV mandate left uncertainty and have really left the sector in limbo, and jobs were lost and confidence was eroded in the Canadian auto manufacturing sector. The Standing Committee on Industry and Technology heard clearly that the original mandate was impossible to meet and would have devastated the auto sector in Canada. The revised framework risks producing many of the same harms with limited benefit for Canadian workers and manufacturers. Third, instead of securing the trade agreement Canadians were promised by Prime Minister Carney by July 21st, 2025, to protect Canadian auto workers and other manufacturing jobs, the government is asking taxpayers today to subsidize foreign-made EVs. This announcement comes after 5,000 Canadian auto sector jobs have been lost, including, among others, 3,000 at Stellantis, 500 at GM's Oshawa plant, and 725 at Carr. And I will say that while the government's announcement for worker support programs is welcome, and however well-intentioned, it does not create new Canadian jobs and it does not fix the underlying problem. Canada's auto legacy deserves policies that strengthen our domestic production. Today does not do that. Canada has, of course, as you know, a proud history, more than 100 years, in fact, of building world-class automobiles. We have some of the best workers in the world in the auto sector in Canada. It supports over 600 direct and indirect world-class jobs and contributes more than $16 billion to the national economy. Decisions affecting this sector must strengthen, not undermine, as today did, Canadian workers and domestic production. And lastly, while Conservatives welcome the end of the original EV mandate achieved through our sustained pressure and our effective official opposition, and we're certainly validated by today's Liberal shift. Serious concerns remain that the new policy will continue to harm Canada's auto industry while enriching the American sector using Canadian taxpayer dollars, even as the ongoing trade war continues to cost good Canadian manufacturing jobs.
As you point out,
by the Conservative Party to react to the announcement of today, could you explain your position in French, please? One of you, anyone.
We'd be happy to get you all the information today, fully bilingual.
None of you can do this right now? Oui,
Aujourd'hui, c'est un gros problème pour tout le monde dans le secteur du Canada. C'est très bien pour Donald Trump et les auto workers des États-Unis. C'est excellent. Aujourd'hui, c'est excellent pour Donald Trump. Today is an excellent day, by the way, for Donald Trump because the Canadian government just announced $2.3 billion in EV and plug-in hybrid subsidies that will go to enrich the American auto sector. Today, just to be very clear, today's an excellent day for Donald Trump.
So to be clear, you don't support the purchase incentives to encourage people to buy EVs?
I think it's difficult for us as parliamentarians to support something that sends up to $2.3 billion taxpayer dollars to the American auto sector. That's very difficult for us to support.
Ms. Dancho, Toyota and Honda make cars in Ontario.
Absolutely.
Toyota and Honda, especially Toyota, makes plug-in hybrids. So is there a problem with that?
Again, there's a very small amount of cars in Canada that meet these requirements. There are some, we appreciate that, but the vast majority of these subsidies will go towards foreign-made plug-ins and EVs.
So imagine if you're an auto worker in Brampton who lost. Imagine if you're an auto worker in Brampton who lost their job because the production of the Jeep Compass EV went to the United States, right? That's what's happened. And the Jeep Compass EV is now going to be eligible for these rebates. So it's going to be built in the United States, shipped back into Canada, purchased by Canadians with subsidy from taxpayer dollars that those workers actually paid in their taxes. You ask yourself, why was this announcement not made at an auto production facility today? It wasn't, because it's not good news for manufacturing autos in Canada. As my colleague said, the vast majority of EVs bought in Canada are made in the United States. There are very few made here in Canada. In fact, over the entire lifespan of manufacturing EVs in Canada, we've manufactured 40,000, and we produce around 1.3 million vehicles a year. This is going to be another blow for Canadian auto workers, in addition to the 50,000 Chinese EVs that are coming in. This announcement is not for Canadian auto workers.
Mr. Seeback, I'm just confused. You're assuming that Canadians would want to buy a Jeep Compass instead of buying a Toyota or a Honda product that's made in Ontario at this point. Your argument is based on that.
We don't produce enough of those, and I don't know how many of those vehicles are actually going to be eligible for this rebate because it's unclear. But what we do know is that the vast majority of EVs that are bought in Canada that are eligible for these things are made by American auto workers, not Canadian auto workers. And we're in a trade war. Donald Trump, but Donald Trump has put 10% tariffs on every single vehicle that we send to the United States. And in return, we're giving subsidies for the EVs that they produce to come into Canada. How is that elbows up? This is the exact opposite of elbows up, and it's going to hurt Canadian auto workers who have already lost 5,000 jobs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to just make a statement from the New Democrats on the new auto policy that was announced today by the Prime Minister. New Democrats have long called for a Canadian auto sector strategy, and we're pleased to see the beginning of one today. The centerpiece for New Democrats has always been that we believe that if you want access to the Canadian auto market, then you have to build those vehicles here. We also believe that the world is clearly going in the direction of electrification of vehicles, and so we think that a core component of a Canadian auto sector strategy has to be built on the idea that we want to become a world leader in electrification of vehicles. I will say that the auto policy of the current government has been erratic. You know, they took away the EV rebates and then they put it back in. They took away the EV targets and then they put them back in today, of course, and less ambitiously. So I think what the industry needs are clear and consistent messages and investments so that we can reinvigorate our sector. I will say also that New Democrats send our thoughts out to all of those families of laid-off workers. We've seen thousands of auto workers laid off in Canada, and that is something that needs to be reversed. And we need to make sure that we build our auto sector in this country on stable relationships with countries and manufacturers that will actually invest here, and that'll be the core of the NDP policy in this regard.
Monsieur Boulerice, pourriez-vous nous expliquer la position du NPD sur l'annonce d'aujourd'hui? Peut-être faire la question en anglais en premier, puis je vais y aller tout de suite après.
You mentioned that this is a less ambitious target than the EV mandate. What do you think of Mark Carney calling himself an environmental leader?
Well, I think the facts completely belie that. He's eliminated the carbon tax. He eliminated the EV targets that were set to have all new cars be electrified, sold in Canada by 2030. He got rid of it. Now he's put it to 2035. He's weakened environmental standards in Alberta. And he's promoting a bitumen pipeline to the West Coast. I don't know how anybody could call themselves a leader on the climate with a record like that.
And what do you make of these incentives to purchase an EV? Is that a good move or a bad move? What's your take on that?
I think it's a good move. I think that the EV rebate proved to be very popular. It's an incentive to consumers to make that switch to electric vehicles. I don't think it's a forever policy, but I think it's a good start to encourage Canadians to get out of their internal combustion engine vehicles and into electric vehicles. But of course, we need to provide Canadians with affordable EVs as well. And I think that an auto strategy has to be based on policies that will encourage manufacturers to make affordable electric vehicles available to consumers in Canada. In the meantime, subsidizing it, I think, is a good step. Merci.
Oui, merci.
Donc, voulez-vous nous expliquer la position du NPD sur l'annonce d'aujourd'hui?
C'est sûr que le...
Je crois que M. Davies doit peut-être aller en chambre, donc il n'y a pas d'objection s'il veut y aller.
Pour le NPD, le secteur automobile est un secteur important qui fait vivre des milliers de familles à travers le pays. C'est des bons emplois et des emplois syndiqués. Donc, pour nous, c'est vraiment un secteur qu'on a toujours soutenu comme d'autres également. Alors, de faire en sorte d'avoir une politique qui est cohérente, qui favorise la construction puis la fabrication ici au Canada, c'est une bonne chose. On est en faveur de ça et on l'accueille vraiment avec plaisir. En ce qui concerne le changement puis le virage vers les véhicules électriques, ça aussi, c'est quelque chose qui fait partie du programme du NPD, qu'on a toujours favorisé et qui est très favorable au Québec, d'ailleurs, qui est un grand producteur d'électricité propre. Si on veut faire le virage vers l'électricité, il faut que ce soit l'électricité propre, sinon ça ne fait aucun sens. Par contre, là où on est un peu critique, c'est le fait de mettre des mesures, des rabais pour le consommateur, puis après ça les enlever, puis après ça les remettre. Ça crée de la confusion, il n'y a pas de stabilité puis de prédictibilité. Donc ça, c'est important pour les fabricants, c'est important pour les consommateurs également. Et là, je trouve que le gouvernement libéral de M. Carney, il joue un petit peu au yo-yo avec le portefeuille des acheteurs.
La disparition des normes d'accessibilité au profit de normes environnementales plus strictes sur la fabrication même des véhicules, est-ce que c'est une bonne idée, ça?
Je pense qu'on a réussi au travers des dernières décennies, avec des normes qui s'appliquaient à tous les fabricants automobiles, à réduire certaines sortes de pollution. On l'a vu, puis tout le monde s'est adapté par la suite. Alors, avoir des normes environnementales qui sont plus strictes, qui s'appliquent à tous, ça, c'est un pas dans la bonne direction.
Et sur les incitatifs, vous avez...
Mais je vous dirais que pour le bilan, l'empreinte carbone de ce gouvernement-là, cette mesure-là est intéressante, mais elle est contredite par un paquet d'autres mesures, comme par exemple l'abolition du plafond d'émissions du secteur pétrolier puis gazier, puis l'autorisation de nouveaux pipelines. C'est faire une chose et son contraire aussi, là.
Vous avez salué les incitatifs. 5 000 pour un véhicule. Des véhicules de 50 000 et moins électriques, il n'y en a pas beaucoup. Est-ce que c'est bien ciblé?
Je pense qu'il aurait pu être un petit peu plus généreux que ça, puis d'aller un peu plus... regarder la réalité du marché actuel. Si vous avez juste un modèle ou deux qui sont disponibles, ça restreint beaucoup le choix du consommateur qui peut-être va continuer avec une voiture à moteur thermique, ce qui serait une mauvaise chose. Peut-être que le 50 000 était un peu trop restrictif, effectivement.
Merci.
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 Ronnie's trip to Washington. Do you think that was helpful?
To who?
To Canada and the U.S. trade relationship.
I guess that would probably be a question for Mr. Giovanni and perhaps a question for my colleagues who are responsible for our relationship with the United States to judge whether or not there was something tangible that came out of that trip. I wasn't privy, of course, to the conversations that he's had, but I haven't seen anything to suggest that it was productive in regards to advancing any tangible interests that we have in terms of moving forward in our relationship.
We've been in this trade war for about a year now. This seems to be the first time he stepped in, even though he has this personal relationship with the Vice President. Are you concerned about that?
Am I concerned that he's stepping in?
Did he step in earlier or offer to help?
No, not at all.
All right, thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Mr. Miller, can we ask you about Jamil Giovanni's trip to Washington?
Not really.
All right.
We'll talk about it.
Giovanni going to the U.S. for trade talks. He says he spoke with Vance about advancing Canada's interests.
Well, I actually won't comment on that too much more than, was he doing it with coordination with the Prime Minister's office? I think back to steel in 2017, and we had a Team Canada approach. All MPs from all parties were working collectively. We were descending on Ottawa, but it was coordinated, and we always worked with the government of the day, and it was all party support, and we understood the effectiveness of having different relationships. But what took him so long? A year ago he got elected. He could have been talking to his old roommate, the Vice President of the United States, and working on Team Canada's approach, but he wasn't. So I don't know. It's maybe he can explain that.
Do you want to add another?
Thanks.
Last night, Stephen Harper said that Canada should consider counter tariffs on the U.S. Do you think we should be considering counter tariffs?
Yes, I think so. Mr. Carney during the election said elbows up. Since then, we see concessions, except the speech in Davos. But after a speech, it's really good to act.
Okay, and in terms of, Harper also said last night that he thinks one-way tariffs could destroy Canadian manufacturing. Is that a view that you share as well?
I think the tariffs of Donald Trump, are dangerous for our economic sector. But I'm also troubled to be to agree with Mr. Harper on so many points.
In terms of the kind of counter tariffs, would you want to see sectoral, maybe a more targeted approach?
I think a targeted approach is a good thing. But for more details, you should speak to Don Davies, who is our leader and also our industry critic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Should do counter tariffs on the United States. Do you agree with that? Is that something your government's considering?
Well, look, I think we need to keep our options open as this trade dispute goes on, but we're not going to negotiate those things in public for sure.
What do you make of Mr. Giovanni's trip to Washington? Do you think that's a helpful trip?
Look, I would say we have a government that's responsible for those things. The opposition even has critics responsible for those things. I'm not really sure what role he's serving there, but sometimes less is more.
In one U.S. article, he mentioned the deal with China as a major impediment. And he said that we were prepared to import Chinese EVs to displacing jobs from his community in Oshawa. Do you think that's a fair criticism, or is it missing maybe some of the point?
No, I think that we've got a really robust auto strategy announced today that's going to grow the sector and make sure it's competitive globally. And again, I think this is one of the challenges of somebody freelancing down there. There is a whole body of knowledge that's in Global Affairs Canada, that's in ISED, that's in all of these government departments that we rely on to have robust, thoughtful trade conversations with our partners. And we have our own channels in, and that's probably the appropriate place for those trade conversations to occur.
He seems to have a close relationship with the Vice President. Should he have been looped in earlier? Should he have been involved earlier?
Look, a lot of us have a lot of close friendships with a lot of people that may or may not come into play at different times, but sometimes those things are challenges, sometimes those things are benefits, but ultimately you got to think of the whole picture, not just what you want your place to be in it.
But in terms of one-way tariffs, do you think that's not destructive for Canada's manufacturing sector? Or would counter tariffs maybe do less to bring down the temperature?
Well, we have counter tariffs right now on a few different sectors. It's not as though there are no tariffs on United States goods as this ongoing trade dispute occurs, but we've got to stay live to changing situations. There are auto sector tariffs right now, and there are systems where people can get reimbursed for them if they're paying them, as long as there's Canadian benefit. And it's a complicated but important part of the puzzle whenever you start talking about tariffing an industry as integrated as the auto one, which is why we have these robust strategies like the Prime Minister announced today for the auto sector to make sure it'll be strong for years to come.
Thank you.
Mr. Davies,
Can I ask you about Jamil Jovani's trip to Washington? Do you think that's helpful? Is that an appropriate role for him?
It's certainly odd, to see just a backbencher in an opposition party essentially try to conduct foreign policy on his own. I think is unusual, and I think it has the capacity to undermine messages from our government. So, we'll wait and see what he brings back. But I think it's a very unusual development.
He seems to have a close relationship with the vice president. Should this have been used in a different way earlier?
Well, I think there's official lines of communication. We're talking about extremely serious issues. The problems that Canada's experiencing with the United States require nuance and care. And I think when people are freelancing, trying to capitalize on personal relationships is one thing, but risking destabilizing relations that have to be very carefully nurtured is another. So I don't think it's a good development.
Carr said last night that Canada should be considering more counter tariffs on the United States. What do you think about that? Should we be pushing harder against the U.S. with tariffs of our own?
Well, I've been calling for a robust Canadian position vis-a-vis the United States since during the election. And of course, I think Mr. Carney got elected on that promise of elbows up. And I think when you're dealing with a very aggressive American president who threatens us now, it seems, on a daily basis, that taking a strong, robust position in all matters is what the proper position is. So, if I think Canada should rigorously defend our positions. Nobody really wants to see tariffs, but if Mr. Trump is insistent on levying unfair tariffs on Canada, that we have to be prepared to be equally strong in response. And in that sense, I agree with Mr. Harper.
Are you concerned that additional tariffs would increase the temperature and perhaps make the situation more volatile?
Well, that's always a risk. And again, I go back, nobody wants to see increased tariffs. I don't think that's our goal. It's not healthy. But the real question is, how do you respond to an aggressive president who is threatening and imposing unfair tariffs on us? And I think the way that you deal with the bully is you stand up to them.
Thank you.
Thanks.